Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. We're delighted to have you. I'm Beth Dowdy. I'm the coordinator for the Partnership for Regional Prosperity, and that's an organization that was formed by Danville City Council and the Pittsylvania County Board of Supervisors for the purpose of helping this community look to the future, that this group is going to help regional partners work together to address big picture issues that are going to come out of and affect this rolling future that's coming to the Danville and Pennsylvania region. So the group's focus is on the future. And tonight's event is a step toward creating a future this region wants instead of a future that it is thrust upon. I want to thank first the Partnership for Regional Prosperity. We have a steering committee and the members are here tonight. If you want to stand or you want to raise your hand and let everybody see who's here. And I also want to thank the Danville, Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce, which is so generous in letting us use their registration system. It's really a lifesaver. And on top of that, the staff came to help me today to help check people in and help with name tags and keep this process moving. So Anne is in the back of the room. Anne, thank you very much for the Chamber's help. So here's a book that Anne gave me last week. Probably many of you have seen this, which is a kind of a history of Danville, okay? And it's got all these pages filled with things. And the very last page in here is the Institute. So that's where the history of Danville stopped when the Institute was built. Now the Institute is 4 buildings, Tally? It's 5 buildings. I mean, and so much has happened since that day, and it's going to continue to happen for this region. And that's why it's so important for all of us to, as I say, don't be historians, but be futurists. And that's why it's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Ryan. Rebecca is an economist. She's a best-selling author. She's the founder of Next Generation Consulting, and she's a top 50 professional futurist. I didn't even know there were professional futurists. She's worked with communities, she's worked with corporations all over the world, and she's known as a human spark plug, and I can attest to that. She is honest, she's witty, she's full of bright ideas. Overall, I find her to be incredibly inspiring, and I hope that you will too. You know, there's so much possibility that is on the horizon for Danville and Pennsylvania. And you want to know what's next. You know, you want to know what you have to prepare for. That's why Rebecca's here tonight as a professional futurist, tied in with being an economist. And she's going to, teach us what signals to watch for, how to think like a futurist. And this is the one presentation that you will attend, a meeting like this, where you're asked to keep your cell phones out. You can turn them to silent, but have them ready, because Rebecca is going to take your questions by text. She's going to ask you questions. And I just hope, and I suspect, but I hope more than anything, that you'll leave tonight energized and inspired and aware of this community's own resilience and outfitted with tools to face the future. So join me in virtually welcoming Rebecca Ryan.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Beth. What a warm welcome. And I want to thank the Partnership for Regional Prosperity, and I want to thank the Institute for Advanced Learning and Research for hosting me with you virtually tonight, this evening. It's crazy, right? Like, was it dark when you got there this afternoon? It's this time of the year where bringing people together can be really difficult. And yet you are here. And I want to believe that you are here because you are also making a bet in the future of this region. Now, when Beth introduced me, she said that I was a futurist, and some of you are like, what in the actual heck is that? I think the easiest way to sort of set this up is to think about it in this way. Raise your hand if you took a history class. Let me see. Okay, everybody took history class. Raise your hand if you've taken a futures class. 2 hands went up. We're gonna start I guess a support group after this. Meet me at the bar, meet me at the virtual bar. All of us take history classes. It's required to get through high school and often in college, right? And depending on what your degree was in, if you got a 4-year degree in political science or history or government or something, international relations like I did, you had to take a lot of history classes. So history is the study of the past. Journalism is intended to be the science, the profession of reporting on the present, what is. And futuring is the study of emerging trends, to try to anticipate probable, plausible futures. That's right, futures with an S. There's not one single future. There are many plausible futures. And those futures basically depend on 2 things, and you have experienced both in your community. The future can be shaped by external forces. So, your mill with thousands and thousands of employees. I was raised in a company town, West Bend, Wisconsin. My dad was on the 2nd shift making pots and pans and popcorn poppers. The West Bend company was on the West Bend River, like you guys are on the Danville River. And external forces caused the West Bend company eventually to go out of business. My dad lost his job several times, layoffs and so forth. And now the only thing that exists from the West Bend company is the logo. That's the only asset that still exists. You've gone through the very same thing there. External forces, the economy shifted. Things got cheaper to produce in Mexico, in the case of my dad's company, and eventually now China. So external forces. But the future is also shaped by things we do. We are also actors and agents of the future, and you are in a venue right now that is the result of well-intentioned, far-sighted leaders coming together and saying, we might be down, but we're not out, right? So the Institute, Aero Farms, the addition of these 4,000 good manufacturing jobs over the last several years, you are rebuilding your community. So the future doesn't just happen to us. We also happen to the future, right? So today, we've got a couple of big beats for our time together. The first thing is we're going to visit the CIA. What does the CIA know about the future? What can we learn from how the CIA gathers intelligence? The second visit we're going to make is to signals of the future, and we're going to do some of that together at your table. And I just want to warn you, if there are any orphans, it doesn't look like there are any orphans in my line of sight, but if there are any orphans, those of you who are near a table where there's an orphan, invite them to come and sit with you for this little exercise where we're going to talk together about some of the signals of the future for Danville. And then I am going to share with you some of the big driving currents that might not even be visible to the eye, but that I, as a futurist and my team of futurists, things that we're seeing that we believe are going to have a long tail and that you may want to take into consideration as you continue your planning for the region's future and for its prosperity. So, you ready? Let's go. Let's first stop the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. Some of you are old enough, like me, to remember the Cold War. This is like Russia and the Western world, right? And we were in a standoff with each other. And during the time, just before Gorbachev, there was a moment where Americans were not getting good intelligence about what was happening in Russia. And the stakes were very high. I mean, you can imagine, if I make a slight miscalculation in seeing something, stakes are pretty low. When the CIA makes a mistake in seeing something, the stakes can be pretty high. So the directors of the intelligence agency started to just pound their fists and say, why aren't we getting better intelligence? And what they realized is that their analysts, the people whom they were hiring specifically for Russian intelligence at the time, they weren't seeing things as they were actually happening. They were seeing them through these Western filters. They were seeing them through Western filters. And so throughout that period, they started to train their analysts in different ways. And then in 1999, they released a book called The Psychology of Intelligence Analysts. And in that book, and you can download it from the internet, if anybody's interested in it, text me, I'll give you my cell phone in just a minute, and I'll send it to you. It's fascinating. In that book, they broke down how our mental machinery works. Like, why can't we see the things that are in plain view? Well, the answer is because of our cognitive bias, because the way that our neurons are wired together as Americans prevents us from seeing things that are happening in other cultures. And then the third thing they did in this book is they trained you how to overcome those biases. This was the actual manual for how they taught intelligence analysts. Now, I'm going to give you 3 of the tests that were in that book. 3 of the tests that those intelligence analysts took to see how they saw things. So I'm going to share my screen here real quickly. First image. Each one of these 3 triangles has an error. I couldn't get this the first time I saw it. I quickly scanned it. But when I slowed my mind down and I read them aloud, I picked it up. So do this now. Paris in the spring. Once in a lifetime, a bird in the hand. So the article, the in the first and the third triangle, and in the second triangle is repeated. Why don't we see this? It's because these are such common phrases for Native American English speakers that you don't even see that there's a word that's repeated. And of course, they kind of hide it as well, right? So half of these intelligence analysts weren't getting this right away. And I'm going to tell you something. I just briefed the Center for Homeland Defense and Security, their training arm, and the head of the training arm didn't get this either. Now, that's okay. He has other superpowers, I'm sure of it. But just to say that we all have these blinders, these biases that prevent us from seeing things. Here's the second quiz. Another visual quiz. So if you numbered these images 1 through 4 in the top row and 5 through 8 in the second row, by a show of hands, at approximately what number of image, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, did you realize, oh my God, I might not be looking at a man's face? Just hold your hands up in the air. What number? What number? Okay, some of you have one hand up in the air, so somewhere around maybe 4 or 5, and others of you were like, what, I still don't see. If anybody doesn't see the man, and if anybody doesn't see the woman, talk to a neighbor. They'll help you through this. But what this shows, what this exam showed these intelligence analysts, is that we have a hard time changing what we think we're seeing. So if you were pretty locked into a man's face in 1, 2, 3, even 4, it wasn't until I got to number 6 that I thought, this guy's having a stroke. But I was still convinced it was a guy, right? It was that man's face. And by the time I got to 7, I was like, oh, wait, if I zoom out, I can see something slightly different. We tend to perceive what we want to perceive, not what's actually there. Final one, many of you have seen this. This was actually a cartoon in the New Yorker called My Wife, My Mother-in-Law. Okay, many of you have seen this. Put your hand in the air if the first thing you saw was the younger woman looking over her right shoulder. How many of you saw that first? Okay, how many of you first saw the older woman with her chin buried into her shawl? How many of you saw her first? Okay. How many of you still don't see anybody? I love your honesty. Thank you. You too will be helped by a friend, right? But this is another one of those sort of visual challenges. Like, can you see one? Do you see the other? Can you see both? I mean, the goal of a really good analyst would be to see both, right? To be able to see both perspectives. So it goes to show that, like, if the CIA is having this kind of a problem training their analysts, we as amateur futurists, we who've never taken a futuring class, are going to have a difficult time seeing the future. And Anais Nin says it so well. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. Now, signals of the future are happening all around us all the time, in plain sight. They're often on the margins. They might make you think, what's going on here? They look weird or strange. In fact, if you have any of these responses to things your kids do, to things that you're seeing when you're walking around out on the street, or you're reading something in a trusted source of news that makes you think, oh, huh, or what? You're probably seeing a signal of the future, like this one. A few months ago, the Elbe River in the former Czechoslovakia, these images started to be seen. And what are these images? Well, you see the river line at the bottom here. These are called the hunger stones. And in previous droughts, previous generations left messages for future generations. And the message is basically this: if you can read me, weep. Because in previous times when the water got this low, a drought was happening. And when a drought was happening, a famine was coming. And if a famine was coming, people were going to die in successive seasons. So these are called the hunger stones, hidden from plain sight, but left for us by previous generations. So we're going to do a very quick tabletop exercise right now. And it is simply, and there are no right or wrong answers. This is just practice. This is going to be a 15-minute exercise. And we're going to use it to just kind of spur some conversation about signals of the future. Okay, so 15 minutes. Please invite orphans to join your table. And let's start with the person whose birthday is closest to today, not by year, by date. So whose birthday is closest to November 14th? They're going to start what their name is, where they're currently living, and one signal that they think they're noticing about the future. So if I was starting, I would say, my name is Rebecca. I live in Madison, Wisconsin. And one signal that I'm noticing about the future is that now when I'm checking in at my doctor's office, I'm being asked if I'm having any anxiety symptoms. Okay, so doctors are now asking patients between the ages of 18 and 64 if they're experiencing any anxiety. That seems like a signal of the future. Okay, you've got 15 minutes. I'm going to leave the instructions on the screen, and I'll give you a 2-minute warning when you've got 2 minutes left. Make sure everybody participates. Go.
Yeah, we do have. But fine.
people who have never been out here. Always remind
2 minutes, 2 minutes. If your table is done, just go ahead and raise your hand so I can see if you're finished. All right, 2 more minutes for those of you who need a little more time. Let's get those last thoughts out, make sure everybody gets a turn. And for those of you who are already done, if you have a tech nerd who can easily text your table's ideas, I'd love to see some of the signals that all of y'all are noticing. My cell phone number is on the board, it's on the screen. All right, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap 2 times. Everybody coming back together? All right, I would love to see some of the signals of the future that you talked about at your tables. I'll weave those into some of my comments as we move forward. My cell phone is on the screen now, 414-559-1528. This is the same number you're going to use for your questions. So if you want, take a snapshot of this, enter it into your phone and just say hi right now so that you've got me in your phone if you want to ask a question later. But in just a second, I'm going to take this screen off and we're going to go to the next portion. So, oh, hello. I see you 7021. I also see you 5973. 0952. One of the things that came up here is people want experiences more than stuff. Thank you for sending me all the heart emojis. Hi, hello. Golly, y'all are so friendly. I got an hola, hola. All right, love seeing all y'all. Okay, thumbs up, the huge, here's another signal, the huge amount of information at your fingertips. How is it informing people's thinking or like muddying our thinking, right? Okay, all y'all are doing great. I feel very strong and secure that you got it nailed. Now, let me talk a little bit as your resident futurist here tonight about the difference, well, let me back up just a second. As a professional futurist, paying attention to signals that are happening on the margins is really important. In fact, once a week, I convene a panel of a bunch of other nerds, futurists and all different disciplines, and we talk about the signals that we're noticing, the signals of the future that we're noticing. And but there's a difference between a signal and a trend. And let me explain it this way. I have two dogs. I have a 63-pound yellow lab mix, Catahoula lab mix named Rue. And then I have a tiny little 13-pound dog named Pip, like Pipsqueak. And yes, I'm one of those people that has a big and a little. So, and I love walking my dogs. It is really common when I'm out walking my dogs, especially in the spring or the fall, that something will drop. I will feel a drop of something. And I'm always hoping that I'm not walking under a tree. But the first thing I do, I mean, imagine that you're doing this. You're out and you're walking and you feel a drop of something. What's the first thing you do? Yeah, you like look up. And I don't know what you do, but I also try to make myself as big as possible. It's like I'm trying to increase my surface area to figure out if there are other, hopefully, raindrops happening. But I look up for the visual cue. Is there a cloud overhead? Is it a dangerous looking cloud overhead? What is over me that is causing rain? And I raise my arms out. I put my arms out to try to increase my surface area, see if I can pick up some more. The difference between a signal and a trend is like the difference between a raindrop where you're like, did that just happen? You know, and you're trying to figure out if others are happening. A signal is to a raindrop as a trend is to a rainstorm. So by the time a signal grows into something much bigger like a trend, everyone's paying attention to it. Like in manufacturing, right? There was a moment where everybody started talking about 3D printing. It had passed from being a signal, something weird and on the margins, into the mainstream. The same thing is happening right now with mental health, right? Mental health was sort of like a signal at the beginning of the pandemic, but now we're hearing about mental health every time we turn around. And, you know, most curiously or concerningly about our kids, you know, like if I talked to a friend of mine over the weekend who said like, man, if you take your kid out of the mental health queue to talk to a counselor, it's going to take you 9 months to get back into a queue for that kid to talk to somebody. So that started as a signal at the beginning of the pandemic when our kids were being pulled out of school, and now it's like a trend. Everyone's talking about it. So a signal is to an isolated raindrop. A signal is the equivalent of sort of an isolated raindrop. A trend is more of a rainstorm. So by the time something becomes a trend, most people are paying attention to it. Now, not every signal grows into a trend. Some signals just happen and they just recede back into the background. They don't move to the foreground. They don't gather steam, just like some raindrops don't become rainstorms. But the practice of listening for signals is one of the practices of thinking more like a futurist. And I would argue that you are a futurist already. I mean, let's just do a really quick show of hands here. Today is only Monday. Let's see, how many of you, like in the last 3 days, so Saturday, Sunday, or today, how many of you checked a weather forecast? Put your hand in the air. Okay, right on. Okay, that's a futuring thing. You're trying to figure out what the weather's going to be. In fact, meteorologists really understand what my profession is. They're like, we get it, because they do the same thing. They're trying to anticipate the future. Put your hand up in the air if you have already been thinking about Thanksgiving or holiday plans for this coming. Okay, you've already purchased your turkey, you already got your grocery list going, you're thinking about your travel plans, right? Okay, you're being futurist, you're planning ahead. How about this? This is has been a little bit painful. Have any of you in the last month opened your 401k or retirement savings account to look at how it's doing? Yeah, okay, so it hasn't been awesome news. But yes, that's another thing, you know, you're trying to anticipate, will I have enough money to retire? How are things going? Do I need to do some adjusting of my portfolio? And then final question, how many of you hold any kind of insurance? Renter's insurance, property insurance, car insurance, flood insurance? Okay. Point being, all of you are already futurists. When you're trying to anticipate the future, plan for the future, guard against risk for the future, maximize your opportunities in the future, you are being a futurist. The difference between this sort of amateur futuring of like being curious about the future and trying to plan for the future and what I do as a professional futurist is I just have a few more tools that I use. And this one that we're talking about right now, signals versus versus trends is one of those tools. So I do want to bring you, however, a couple of deeper currents that are happening. So a good metaphor for this is like when you're looking at the ocean, right? Or you're looking at a body of water. There are the tides, and there are you can't see the tides. There are the waves that you can see along the surface of the water, but then there are things happening much deeper, sort of, they can be the tides, or they can be the rip currents, things that are happening at a deeper level. So I want to bring for you a few deeper currents. These are more than signals, but they're so deep that they're almost invisible. And we tend to just talk about these things on the surface, but they're going to have an impact on your region as you think into the future. So the first one is this: people are moving. How many of you on your block have had anybody move in or move out in the last 12 months? Show of hands. Move in or out, okay? It's happening everywhere. In fact, check this out. Hang on, let me show you real quickly. Have a good laugh at this. U-Haul literally ran out of trucks leaving California in 2021. This has never happened before. California has always had sort of that strong sucking sound, but in 2021, they ran out of trucks leaving California. And some of that is because, the high-tech companies have said, Airbnb said, you can work and live anywhere in the world that you want. That we are no longer going to be centered in a physical location, right? If I find, by the way, the U-Haul moving index, one of the most interesting pieces of data to show how people are moving in and around. During COVID, Maine was actually the largest net importer of people moving into the state. Maine, so the people are moving, and this is going to have impacts on our downtowns. I was just consulting with Denver this morning. Their occupancy level of their downtown has always been very business centric. Things are changing for them. So how do we become a place where people are welcome? How do we become a best place to live so that if you have one of those jobs that is portable and movable, you can take advantage of it? The second big sort of undercurrent is how people are valuing their time. Something happened, during these last 2 years, faced with the uncertainty of COVID as an example, where people faced that existential crisis, like, what's this all about? What's this all about? And so moms faced with staying employed or helping their kids learn from home, they chose to help their kids learn from home. We are now hearing from more and more people who are saying, I just don't want to work for that jerk anymore, if I don't have to. So I remember in April of 2021, when the quits rate, these are people voluntarily leaving their job, the quits rate hit 4 million people. Whoa, there were headlines everywhere. Well, the next month it was 3.9 million people. And the month after that, it was almost 4 million people. And people said, well, when school starts again, the quits rate will go down. It didn't. It hasn't. So there is a lot of volatility in our, this, if you're trying to hire workers right now, there's a lot of volatility, a lot of oxygen. The number of people starting new jobs is higher than it's been since the 1960s when we started measuring. And so the whole point here is that people have faced themselves and how they're spending their time. And the reason this is so critical in our country is because in America, we invented workaholism. We invented the idea that my work is my identity. And now we're seeing, pandemic and post-pandemic, that people are making different choices. No, my family is more important. My health is more important. My free time is more important than my work. And so this is going to have sort of a long tail. I want to show you a couple of data points on this that really caught me by surprise. The first one is this. In a Mountain West community, out of 63 total applicants, 60 of them withdrew their application after they found out that the job had no hybrid or remote opportunities. 60 out of 63 applicants withdrew when they found out there was no hybrid or remote option. Here's another one, the 4-day work week. When I was working again with the Maine Municipal Association a couple of months ago, what cities are doing is they're making, like cities as employers, like the city of, Beddington, the city of Portland, Maine, they're moving to a 4-day work week because this is a way that they can win the race for talent. If they can do a compressed work week, and by the way, they're not saying we're not working 40 hours, they're just maybe working 4 10s or 3 12s, or whatever the case is, that we've been doing this in healthcare for a while. But other organizations are now trying to use this 4-day work week as a competitive advantage in reference to people choosing to value their time a bit differently. What else are we seeing? What else are some of these big undertones that we're starting to see? Well, I mentioned earlier the notion of anxiety or people's well-being. The World Health Organization estimated a year ago already that the mental health challenges coming out of COVID would be some of the biggest challenges facing us over the long haul. And let me share a signal and a data point on this. First, let me share the signal. This is from a Midwestern state. It's not Wisconsin, it's a different upper Midwestern state. The Manufacturing Council in that state voted at the beginning of this year that mental health was their top training priority. So the notion that mental health has now moved from one of those marginalized, we don't talk about it in polite company, into the manufacturing councils of leading manufacturing states. And here's a data point that stopped my mind. 1 in 7 American men report having no friends. I mean, this has a long tail. This has an undercurrent for us because we know that when people are lonely, they have poorer health outcomes. They don't live as long. Their level of anxiety and depression goes up. So we're facing a few long tails here. 1 around mental health, 2 about loneliness and anxiety and depression. But what is the cure for all of that? I mean, some of the cure for all that is connection. So how do we come out of this time of like physically distancing from each other and rejoin a conversation like the one we're having tonight, right? Recently I had a county manager call, and he wants to do a 2050 vision for the county, and I'm really excited about it. I'm like, that is an exciting project. And then he said, and Rebecca, how are you going to make sure that you talk to everybody in our county? And I looked over my shoulder like, Al, are you talking to me? I'm not going to be talking to everybody in your county. It's your job to talk to everybody in your county. And so he's done this exercise where he's looked at the level of connection that the county has with people. And what he's realized is that they have 90,000 discrete contacts with people in their county. I'm not going to give away which county it is, it's private, but the idea here being like, this is a big deal. They already have these connections, but maybe they're not using them. Maybe they're not inviting people into some of these conversations about where folks want the future to go. So these trends, 1, people are moving. What does that mean for your region? How do you become a welcoming community? Number 2, people are showing that they value their time differently. What does that mean for your organization or for the region? I think a lot about if we're going to, Kansas has gone to 4-day weeks at schools, in part because of the teacher shortage. Well, that means that a lot of communities are going to have to try to mirror that in the workplace because parents don't want to pay for that extra day of daycare. So how do we, become a community, if that is our wish, that can do that to try to win the war for talent by rethinking how and where and how, when we work? Third big trend is about well-being, people's sense of stability, and how can we be a community that brings people out and forward in relationship with each other. So I'm going to go to Q&A in just a second, but I want to share with you that there is a huge opportunity for you to keep this conversation moving. On December 5th, Beth and her team are hosting a game that my team has helped design. It's called The Big Sort. It's called The Big Sort. And if you take a picture of this QR code, you can go to register for The Big Sort. And at this game, at this event, it's a tabletop card game. You're going to discuss the trends that are going to have the most impact on your region in the future so that you can plan for the most prosperous, ambitious, visionary future possible. So I'm going to leave this screen up there so you can take a picture of that QR code. And I'm going to go to my cell phone now, and I'm going to see what all y'all have sent me in terms of questions. All right. Thank you to 6960 for the good feedback about the raindrop rainstorm. Somebody said maybe Maine is becoming the #1 importer of people because of some of their cannabis laws and regulations. Okay, so let me share this again. Text your questions to 414-559-1528. I'm going to take a few of these questions. All right. Future of water. Let's talk a little bit about this. You guys, you know, you're on a river. That helps. But we started to see, here was an early signal. An early signal was when breweries started moving out of the Mountain West and moving to like North Carolina, to kind of your area of the country, because they knew that they were going to need to secure long-term water sources, right? And you guys have that more or less in your region. Here's the interesting signal of the future. When there was you know how every profession, every scientific profession has their journal, you know, like the journal of geologists. In one of these journals in the summer, this came out of my signals panel that I host on Wednesdays. In one of these journals, the authors were advocating that we've got to stop using the word drought. Check this out. Drought assumes that it's a temporary condition and you're going to return back to the condition where moisture levels in the soil were at, you know, like a certain threshold. But what the Mountain West and California are experiencing, you can no longer call it a drought because there's no anticipation of return to prior moisture levels. So there's a whole different gradation we're going to need to use when it comes to how we talk about drought and severe weather. Will the Big Sort help us to identify the trends? Good news, we're actually helping identify the trends already. So when you come to the Big Sort, you're going to be looking at the trends that my team has generated for your region with Beth and others' help. So you're going to come in with a deck preloaded, and you will have the ability to add additional trends. I will say, if there are trends that you feel you definitely want us to pay attention to, go ahead and text me, and I'll pass this on to my colleague Yaz. Okay, thank you. Not a question, but telehealth. Yes, this is not going away. In fact, Zoom is now interested in getting into on-site health. You know that things are starting to cross a threshold when technology companies are trying to come into the physical space and physically oriented companies are trying to go into the tech space. So Zoom in Portland has a clinic, right? So this is a digital service, Zoom, that is now opening physical clinics in much the same way as Amazon, a digital online shopping experience, is opening their Amazon stores. So we've certainly crossed a Rubicon. What is the most important thing we can do? This is from 5475. What is the most important thing we can do to become futurists? Reading, observing, dreaming? I would say all of those things are interesting and important, but I think the most important thing to do is to broaden your breadth of inputs. So we all tend to, as we get older, we get a little bit more and more, most of us get more and more narrow in the people that we talk to most frequently. We get a little more narrow sometimes in our political viewpoints. We get a little more narrow in what we think is good or bad. And what you'll notice among futurists is we talk to all kinds of people all the time. Why? Because signals can happen anywhere. So I think the most important thing to do is to broaden your input. So if you don't talk much to kids, talk to kids. If you're in business, talk to your most entrepreneurial clients because they are natural futurists. If you work in an organization, like who's the weirdest weirdo in your organization? Like what are they thinking about the future? These are some of the diverse inputs that you can use. Oh wow, you are lighting me up here. Okay, how do you determine if a signal is not a trend? Okay, that's a good question. So raindrop to rainstorm, okay? So anything that's like in the mainstream, like it's already being talked about widely among other communities, or if it's like if you're in an industry, like everybody in the industry is already talking about it, it's probably a trend. Signals are things that are really on the margin. They are very odd, they're very unusual. So again, signals, raindrops, odd, unusual, and on the margins. Trends in the mainstream, no longer odd, no longer unusual, pretty widespread, and everyone is talking about them. Let me take a couple more, and if I miss anybody's, I'll text you a little bit later this evening or tomorrow. Oh boy, the QR code is taking me to a Google search result screen, and the top result is a book by Bill Bishop. Is this the correct QR code? Beth and I are going to cover this, and we will send a follow-up email to everybody with a link to the Big Sort. Thank you for giving us the heads up on this. How do you suggest working with elected officials to look at and consider the signals we're seeing? Government isn't known for pivoting quickly. Any suggestions? Okay, two things. First thing is, government isn't supposed to pivot quickly. Fashion can pivot quickly. Government isn't supposed to pivot quickly. So it's okay that government doesn't act quickly. It's actually a safeguard. We've done some consulting with the armed forces, and they often don't have futurists on staff either, and it has, in some cases, caused casualties and other negative consequences. But the military reminds me again and again, we're not designed to just shift on a dime in how we do things. You know, there is a reason that there's a chain of command. It's intended to build in safety valves and checks and balances. So we expect the same from our government. However, this is where an initiative like what we're doing with this partnership is important, because if we can come together as a community and say, here are the top trends we know we need to work on in the future, then you can help give your local elected officials some cover, you know, some ground cover or some air cover, I guess we should say, so that they can start to help develop plans. The other thing is we're noticing more and more communities where we're not just relying on local government to come up with the plan. It is a multi-stakeholder event. So I've worked in communities where it's like, it's the Urban League, the United Way, and the Chamber of Commerce, and they do the regional plan. I've worked in communities where it's 16 different municipalities and the county and the chamber and the Economic Development Agency. The idea is they create a shared regional vision, and then local government and county government can take their lanes out of that vision and amplify those, and the other stakeholders in the community can help handle and support the rest. The idea here is, I think we're past the days of the siloed, you do this and I do this. We're at the place where what you guys are doing now with the regional partnership, where we need together as one, think about the future, and then figure out what our different lanes are. All right, I'm gonna take one more, and then I got some closing data I wanna share with you. Oh yeah, from last four digits, 4230. How do we hold on to solid values while still fashioning ourselves with these futurist approaches, many of which support fastidiousness over depth? Well, I disagree with your assumption that futuring is about fastidiousness. Futuring is about paying attention to a lot of things that are changing, but it's not about abandoning values. In fact, I think the key here is, let's talk about two words: timeless, timelessness. So values like candor and respect, dignity, those are timeless values, right? The way we talk about them, the way we demonstrate them may be different because there's a timely way of doing it that's maybe based on how people are meeting today, right? So if you're going to have a Facebook Live meeting, you may have to state, you know, what your civility pledge is up front and ask people attending that meeting to uphold that, right? But that doesn't mean that your values change. It's just that how you're meeting or how you're gathering input might be a little more on trend, as they say, right? Using some of the newest technology. So in my experience, I've only been doing this for 25 years, but in my experience, the communities that win, like the communities that really reach their potential, let's say that, there is a deep rootedness about their approach because there's only one Danville, right? There is something about the history, the geography, the DNA of your region that makes it unique. So you don't want to copy and paste some other region's plan. You can be inspired by it, right? You can be fascinated by it. You can do more research about it. Wow, that kind of a technique might work in our community. How did you do it? Let's figure that out, right? But there's something that is timeless and deeply rooted in the DNA of your region. And you've got to understand that so that whatever your future strategy is, can grow out and emerge from that. So I don't want anybody to confuse that being future facing, looking at what's coming towards us, means that we abandon what's in the past. Let me close with some insight. We've put this survey, and I'll get back to those of you who I haven't been able to get to. I'll get back to you a little bit later. We put this survey in the field at the beginning of 2022 because we really wanted to understand how people were thinking and planning for the future. So the first question we asked is strategy a part of your job? And 95% of our respondents said, yep, it is. Which was great because this is who we work with. This is who we write for in our blogs. These are the folks that we're trying to help, right? Are people for whom strategy is their job. And then we asked, all right, how do you spend your time? That big blue bar there, 69% say I spend my time on tasks like email, meetings, like things that are very much like if my nose is here and this is the next hour, I'm spending most of my time right here on these tasks that are right in front of me. 17% of people's time is spent thinking about industry trends. Another 7% of time is spent on professional development. And then in red there, you've got 7% spent on emerging issues. So clearly the futurist mindset is, let's say in the bottom quartile of how people are spending their time. Now let me show you one other contrast. Again, strategy is part of my job. And then we said, how many minutes a month do you spend working on the future, right? And the overall results when we medianed this out is that 1.5 to 4.5 minutes a day are being spent thinking about the future. As a futurist, this makes me a little nuts because if you know that strategy is your job and you're leaving it to the 41st hour of your week or the 51st hour of your week, and you're not developing a point of view about the future, you're not doing your job, right? So I'm thrilled that Beth and the partnership and you are coming together to beat the odds, to beat the median. You're going to spend a couple hours together at the Big Sort thinking together about the future of your region, and it is an annuity that will pay off. Use the QR code at your own at your own discretion. I know Beth will follow up with you guys and get you the correct sign up link, but December 5th is when we're playing the Big Sort. My colleague Yaz will be facilitating that. And if you'd like to stay in touch, here are a few ways to do that. I want to thank you for being good ancestors. You are the people that future generations will have to thank for your region's future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And so for everyone now, I think you better understand, one, why the Partnership for Regional Prosperity is doing this, is going through this process of trying to get us to really focus on what everyone wants tomorrow to look like in Danville and Pittsylvania County. And also, I hope that you'll kind of use some of the skills, techniques that Rebecca talked about in just in your own lives on how you look at beyond what I need to buy at the grocery store for next week and more into what we all want the future to be. As I said, as I think all the time, the moment we have today, used to be the future, and that's what we have ahead of us. So I don't know what happened with the QR code. As I say, the kids tell me I need a QR code on things. And I don't know why. We'll make sure, because fortunately we have everybody's email, and we'll make sure that that's accurate. So it is December 5th. It's a great opportunity to take, what Rebecca talked about today and what I know all of you were thinking about, and take it to the next step. And what's going to come out of that is really identifying what the values are of this region, what the future looks like for this region, and to not necessarily set the direction, but to give some information that will help set a direction. So please sign up we can take 80 people, because it is very interactive, and it requires a lot of collaboration. And I hope that you all can really participate. After this first one, after the holidays, we'll have other big sort sessions around the region. And so you will, if you can't make it on December 5th, there will be other opportunities. But I do, again, want to thank the Chamber for helping make this run smoothly. I want to thank Telly and the Institute for putting on a very fine event. They're such a pleasure to work with. And I want to thank you all for being here on behalf of the Steering Committee of Partnership for Regional Prosperity. I know that everyone appreciates the time you put into this, and I hope that we were able to provide some value to you in learning how to think like a futurist. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you on December 5th.